welcome back to the 15-Minute Fantasy Writer. I am author and writing coach and educator, Autumn Burt, as well as the creator of the Am Writing Fantasy blog. So today we are going to world building part 3, and now things are going to start getting really exciting. This is a long video, we have a lot to cover, so we're going to go ahead and dive right into the slides. So if you watched the previous videos, you remember in part 1, we covered the first step to world building, and that is what is the era of your story. Now we looked at that first because that really covers a lot of ideas you didn't realize you even developed so far in your story, or that would come with it by looking at what readers will expect in that type of fantasy setting, or even maybe what they learned in history class. So that really helps to kind of give you a quick boost to where you're going with your story. In part 2, we covered the need to develop rules for the magic in your world. Now, the reason we went ahead and did that is rules create tension, which is great for writing your story, but they also shape the culture, impact resources, and commerce for your world. So knowing that before you start creating the world is really advantageous. So if you haven't watched those, don't worry. You can go ahead and watch this video, but I've also put in the show notes, I've put the links to those 2 videos. So you can go back and catch up on the Am Writing Fantasy YouTube channel. But okay, let's dive into part 3. This is world building part 3. So we have all that background work out of the way. So what comes next? Well, now is the time to tackle the physical world of your novel. And that's where it gets all exciting. That's what we all love, isn't it? The trees, the forest, the rocks, the mountain passes. This is what we kind of love in our fantasy stories. So let's go ahead and work on creating it. Because in this lesson, we're going to cover creating cities and towns, kingdoms and regions, rivers and oceans and lakes even. We're even going to talk about the weather. We're even going to cover farmlands, forests, and mountains. We're of course going to look at the people. Not so as in depth as you might expect, but we're going to cover enough, but we're certainly going to talk about them. And we're going to talk about how to make that all unique in this little world. So let's go ahead and get going, because the biggest question is, how are you going to create all of that in an organized manner? Well, the first thing we're going to start with is with a map. It's the easiest way. A map is going to shortcut your world building. Trust me, and you do not need to be a fantastic artist to do this. Don't let it intimidate you. And hopefully you're even going to find it fun, but I promise you, you will at least find it useful. Because a map is going to help you keep everything organized. It's going to create a structure that you can reference, and it's going to help you organize your story so much better. And what's really cool about having a map is it's going to add a new dimension to your writing that you might not have considered if you haven't started with one before. It's going to create the distances between places and even provide you hurdles you might not have thought as you worked on plotting out your story. So there's going to be physical and cultural hurdles that you can create just by making this map. So this is a great tool for your writing, for your readers, of course, and it's going to really help you create a solid world for the setting of your novel. So what we're going to do is, to start off, you need to start with scale and the idea. So the idea you have is going to help you create it. So the first question you need to consider is, what is the common method of travel? And that's why we talked about the era. That should have answered some of those questions for you, like, how do people normally travel? Do they walk? Do they ride horses? Do they sail? Do they use flying ships? This will help to develop how large of a known world you need to create. So part of all of that is also determined by how big of a journey you want your characters to take. Now, if this is epic fantasy, they're probably going to be on an adventure a bit longer than, just going to the next town over. Epic fantasy tends to cover the whole world, or even sometimes worlds if you're going through a dimension. But you don't have to go that big. I've read some great fantasy stories that never left the city in which the story began. It is possible. But even those did hint at the outside world, so you probably should have an idea of what's out there. And so let's go back to looking at your era. If it were on Earth, what band of latitude would this story take place in? Is it going to be tropic, temperate, or frozen? Or is it something else? And do you want all of the story to remain centered in that type of climate? If not, you'll need to cover a larger area, or you could add in some microclimates. And don't worry, we'll get to those and talk about what they are. Again, all in this one episode. So all of this is going to tell you how big of an area you need to create. And if you're like me, probably the size of the paper you need. So, go get that poster board and let's get started. Because what we're going to do now is the time to start drawing. And to start off with, there are two methods to starting out on your map that I'm going to tackle. The first is land masses. And this is a really useful way to start out drawing a large area because if your story tackles an epic journey, you're going to go all over. So this is going to be really good for you. And it's also great if you have a self-contained kingdom like Westeros in Game of Thrones. So this is the easiest way to start with because boundaries of areas are outlined and defined by water. So if you know your main story takes place on a large island or a small continent, draw it in. And what you want to focus on is the coastline. But don't go crazy with detail. You don't need all those little inlets and bays. When a circle or a straight line will do, you can add in the detail later when you have placements and the outlines are all filled in. What you want to do is at least start drawing in those islands, the continents, get an idea of where land masses are going to be located. Method 2 is when you don't have major coastlines, like when the setting remains in the same town or is set against a vast continent without large swaths of water. So this isn't a problem, you can do this as well. First, you need to decide where in the region this city or town is located. Then you need to consider how close it is to a feature like a river or stream. Remember, the oldest and most productive cities are near water, either a coast or a river. Access to water for drinking as a power source for like milling, irrigation, and movements of goods is essential to the development of most areas. So start with that first location or your chosen city and decide how close it is to a river, a lake, or an ocean, and draw it in. Whatever you choose, continue that line. If it is a river, follow it to the outlet and draw along the coast if it has one. Otherwise, stop when you reach the edge of the paper, demarcating your known world. Then ask, where's the next river? Are there islands? Even large rivers can have islands which will vary. Even just your single city can have little nuances that differentiate it, and possibly even, we'll talk about it in a bit, the hierarchy of people and classes in the city. So remember, though, just to sketch everything in roughly, detail will come as you fully settle into the features of the blank map. And now, with the water resources created, or if you didn't need to worry about that option for some strange reason, it is time to locate towns. So go back to what the major method of travel is. If it is by horse, small towns or outposts will be a day's ride from each other. Large cities may be several days away, and walking would be the same as riding. So if people travel on foot through a thick forest, overnight shelters and woodland camping, and probably like pretty common areas, will be set up like campsites. But primary paths would host, at least a cluster of houses at a day's walk or wherever a crossing stream makes it a settable location to create something for people to come and shelter. If goods can be shipped by a river, towns will also be located along safe sections downstream and upstream. So as long as the water is deep enough to be navigable. So towns are often situated where rivers enter lakes and streams. These will control the access to the entire river, as well as create profit from the switch of commerce from sea to stream and vice versa. So for both lakes and seas, those big towns, the really important and wealthy towns, will be located where there are safe, deep harbors because they control the methods of commerce. Now that you have the towns, you need to consider feeding everyone. Food is important. If you haven't guessed, I'm totally into food. I love to eat. So this is really important. Even with your towns, large cities especially require a large amount of produce. So they're not located next to each other because everyone needs to eat, which means a lot of trade or a lot of farmland, foraging, hunting, or fishing. So unless this is a city where everything is brought in, food has to be grown, even if it is moss and mushrooms or caught. So leave room for a way for food to be grown or captured. So as you designate these cities, leave land between the major towns for these growing food and the resources. Even if this is a hunting society, the space between large towns will be greater because those animals need room to live and graze. Plus, foraging for woodland plants does not really have the same productivity as a planted field. You can't feed as many people wandering through the forest trying to find edible berries. And also, don't forget, we're talking about forests and cities and farmland, but if you're in a desert, make sure there's an oasis. You still need to feed the people. They can't eat sand unless you have a very, very strange culture. And now you need to double check too where you previously marked cities and towns. Is there enough space between them to grow food? If not, is the city located on travel routes to have sufficient trade to make up the difference? If yes, good, keep it. If not, well, you might have to move it somewhere else or find a way that they can make up a difference, such as, different trades, a little bit of magic, or you can make it a ruin or a city falling into ruin and chaos. Those are really interesting elements to add to your story. It could really kind of make it fun. And let's also not forget, of course, food isn't as easy as having farmland. Having, grown a couple gardens in my life, I know that. Weather plays a huge, huge part. So agriculture really depends on weather as well as water. Look at the climate and location variables to be certain crops will grow. If you hadn't considered weather or climate patterns before, now is the time to do so. Does it rain enough? If not, if there a river or lake big enough for irrigation? Or is it warm enough to grow plants at least seasonally? Many domesticated animals are herbivores too, or eat herbivores, so a meat-based society is not a simple answer for a lack of growing plants. Something has to be eating the resources in the area, so most likely you're gonna have to have plants growing somewhere. And now it's also the time to consider seasons, be they winter, summer, or monsoon and dry. I know a fantastic story by Benjamin Duskovich that has a seasonal dragon migration. So consider that too. Seasons do not have to be just the way we think of them as weather related. And now, ask yourself, would this alter any town locations or the ability to live there? It actually might make it more favorable. Maybe it's got a warm sea breeze and things will grow longer, even though it's really far north or really far south and very harsh climate. And if you need to rethink any locations, trades and supplies, you need to consider that it might make things difficult. You don't need to build an entire food spreadsheet, but a quick run through of these logistics will eliminate glaring errors that are going to have readers rolling their eyes, at least those careful readers who really love your story. It's going to make it feel more real. And now your map should be fairly well filled in with towns, coastlines, rivers, and lakes. You might even have filled in some other features like the fields, the forests, and the deserts. But what about swamps? Have you considered those other features that you can add? So draw in the landscape beyond what you need to create mini civilizations. You don't need to impact the cities and farmlands you just created, but add in the volcanoes, the bogs, the plateaus, and cliffs in the blank spaces between. Because these areas can help add in those other temperatures or climate regions by creating microclimates. So these are areas like rain shadows or cold regions because it's a high plateau, or, oases or waters and mist deserts. These things can and do happen. There is snow on the equator at Mount Kilimanjaro. Don't forget that things are possible in a small area, and you can have a huge, vast variety by adding in these microclimates. And you know what? Magic can create them as well, and this is why we created magic before the map. So if for some reason there was an ancient war, whatever you want to create, that changed a forest to a desert and it has a definitive boundary, you can do that here as well. And now that you have that rough sketch filled in, you should have a pretty well placed out now. Refine the outlines, the trade routes, and more. Connect areas with trade so that they have routes, pathways, roadways, especially those dangerous paths that not many people take, but it's really profitable and really fast if you do. And remember that there should be large rivers and mountains and lakes. All of those often divide territories. So start considering what areas might be regions or countries, because that is going to be part of your world and the background to your story. But we're going to get more into that next time with step 4. So before more tips on map making, especially those microclimates, pick up the map making cheat sheet for free. The link is in the show notes below the video. And stay tuned for the map making special edition video where I'm going to take you through the steps to make a map in Photoshop to show you it doesn't have to be too difficult and can even be a little bit fun. This was the 15-Minute Fantasy Writer by author Autumn M. Burt. And don't forget to check out the Am Writing Fantasy blog and website for more free resources and tips. And thanks again so much for listening. Leave a comment below to let me know if you're liking these.